But here's the really important thing to understand. Those numbers are much different around the country, but they're not different in the way that the New York Times editorials would suggest that they're different. They're not different in the way that the New York Times reporting would suggest that they're different. So here are the numbers for the Association of American Universities across the board. These are the nation's major research universities, includes, for example, Rutgers, the other major flagship universities. AAU reports the following. AAU reports that at its institutions all across the board, great public universities, 50% of students graduate without debt. 50% nationally graduate without debt. And the average debt numbers for those who are graduating with debt are around $26,000 to $27,000. That's significant debt, no doubt about it. And it's a higher, even in inflation-adjusted terms, than my $17,000. But 2 points about this. One is that's not $100,000, right? The $100,000 number for the graduate from Ohio Northern University, that is way out on the tail end of a distribution, and something's going wrong. Something's going wrong in your financial planning if you are graduating from college with $100,000 in debt. It's not a feature of the sector. And the second thing is that even with $26,000 in debt coming out of one of those universities, the first thing I said continues to hold true. That is, the value, adjusting for tuition paid and adjusting for wages foregone, of the investment that those students have made in higher education remains a very powerful investment. And you don't have to take my word for it. Moody's, the ratings agency, came out with a report on higher education a couple of years ago. It was actually a report that downgraded the sector because of their concerns about some of the things that I'm talking about today. And usually I apologize when I mention the Moody's ratings report, because I'm usually talking to audiences where nobody reads ratings report. I think in this audience I can talk about Moody's and suggest that you read it without getting rebellion from the assembled audience. It's an outstanding report. And one of the things that Moody's says about these debt levels that are coming out, and they give about the same numbers I did across an even broader range of higher education institutions. They say, look, as an investment, higher education still makes extraordinary sense. But there is a problem because the willingness of folks to pay is being stressed heavily. That is, the willingness simply to take on a debt number that looks like $26,000. Even if somebody assures you you've got a great return, at some point there may be an investment that's expensive that is just too daunting for people to take on. And Moody says that's putting the sector under stress. And I want to say a little bit about why it's under stress right now. And I think the fundamental reason, and John was good enough to mention my inaugural speech where I talk a lot about this. The fundamental reason is that education is a fantastic investment. Research is a fantastic investment. They are very long-term investments. They are long-term investments right now in a society that is often focused on the short term. That's focused, for example, on first job, not on lifetime return, or that is focused on whether or not research will pay after 1 year or after 2 years, not after, for example, 40 years, where it may produce knock-on benefits that are much larger. We at Princeton right now have a model that permits us to invest for the very long term in everything that we do, and we are constantly focused on long-term objectives. So I was talking to one of you about our tech investments and tech transfer income before the meeting began. The biggest hit that we have had at Princeton is on a drug called Alimta that paid for our new chemistry building at Princeton. That came out of pure curiosity-driven research in chemistry. We had a chemist who wanted to understand why butterfly wings were colored the way that they are. That's the sort of research that back, at least in my childhood, it would attract the Golden Fleece Award from William Proxmire, right? People would ask, why on earth are we paying for investigations of the color of butterfly wings, right? What could be less useful? Well, it's useful because what that requires is an understanding of organic chemistry. And when you start asking important questions about organic chemistry, it tells you things about medical science. And eventually, these discoveries yielded important treatments for mesothelioma. We bet on the long term in our research, and we bet on the long term in our education. So when Nancy got this kid out of Oregon, whom Stanford had taken a pass on, she had no idea what it would mean if she took that kid into Princeton. And when we get kids like a young woman from the South Bronx, Sonia Sotomayor, coming to an entirely different environment, we have no idea what she's going to be like 40 years down the line. But we bet on the long term, and because we've been fortunate as an institution and have the capacity to draw on our endowment and the support of past generations of Princetonians who are paying it forward, we can do something that Carolyn Hoxby, an economist out at Stanford, suggests is the optimal model for private universities. We bet on the long term. We subsidize the education for everybody. Even if you're paying full freight at Princeton, you're paying about 50% of what it takes in order to pay for your education. And then we wait. We wait for those people 25, 30 years down the line to hit their stride for the long-term benefits of education to pay off. And at that point, they are grateful for what the institution and what for past generations of Princetonians have done for them. And they give back to the institution and help it to succeed going forward into the future. The private universities of this country right now are fortunate to have a long-term business model that's under some stresses, partly because of our dependence on government funding in research, but a long-term business model that lines up with our long-term objectives. Right now, the real stresses, the tremendous stresses in higher education, falling on lots of different institutions, as I said, in some ways ours, but principally I would say on the state institutions, which this country and the state of New Jersey and this community so heavily depend on. Right now, because of this short-term focus, and of course because of the other budget stresses, which all of you are familiar with, we have been disinvesting as a society in public education. So a lot of the times when you see those curves about cost increases in higher education, and people say, oh, how could it possibly be that higher education costs are increasing so much faster than everything else in society? Well, in terms of higher education expenditures, they're not increasing faster. In fact, they're increasing more slowly than most other things in society. What's happening is two things. One is there's always a focus in those articles on the sticker price, so they're leaving out financial aid, which discounts down to net price. That is, at Princeton, as I said, we've taken way up the amount on financial aid. So even though our tuition price has risen, our total tuition dollars taken in have fallen, even measured in nominal dollars. And that will be true across the sector as well. Lots of rise in financial aid. But the second thing is that states have disinvested. States have disinvested in their public institutions. So the highest increases in tuition are coming because states are supplying less and less money to every segment of our higher education ecosystem and asking those institutions to do more and more with less and less. And they are being forced, because there's no other way to do it, to raise tuitions in order to compensate for the money that's being pulled out from their budgets. So I would conclude with the admonition. Obviously, I want to ask all of you to support Princeton and to continue your partnership with us. But I think all of us in the state of New Jersey who care about higher education and who care about business and who care about the economy of this state have a responsibility to urge greater investment in higher education, in particular greater investment in the institutions of this state, including the institutions represented in this room, Thomas Edison State College and Mercer County College. We do have one of the great state public universities in Rutgers. We have a fabulous college here in New Jersey, in Mercer County, in the College of New Jersey, which is, I think, one of the great publicly funded liberal arts institutions in this country and a great asset to the state. And we all need to be champions for those institutions and the other institutions that will supply the human capital for the long term in New Jersey. Because if we want this business community to continue to be vibrant in the decades ahead, we need to be investing now. I'm delighted to have a chance to talk to you about that, and I'm happy to take your questions about Princeton, about higher education, or anything else that's on your mind. Yeah. Well, I'll take the applause first, and then we'll do a question.